and we'll kick off with the first part of the agenda is going to be, well, let me go ahead and just put there. Sorry. You can have this. All right, there you go. We have quite a lengthy agenda. We have the topics go over. We have an overview of the budget work that we've started. And obviously Jennifer and Steve here to go over that. And then we have each of those items listed in front of you. So Jennifer, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Good morning. Good morning. You have in front of you a binder. You should have one at your place. And this is just something we put together so that as we go through the budget process, you can add your presentations here, so it'll be a reference and a resource for you during our budget process. So today we are going to be discussing the 23-24 budget. Some of this information you have seen before, but we felt it was important as we begin this work to kind of reorient ourselves as to where we are. So if you recall, back in August, there was a meeting, and the board did talk about some parameters and some assurances for this upcoming 23-24 budget process. So one of them was to prioritize based on the district's mission and vision and the board goals. The other was to have open and timely communication, gather input, pursue efficiencies in the budget, investigate potential revenue sources, utilize nutrition if necessary as the primary means of position reductions, and also provide regular board updates on this process. So, factors that are influencing our budget as we are today, of course, our enrollment is driving most of our budget, and it's driving our staffing needs. As enrollment increases, staffing needs increase. Student attendance drives the revenues that we receive from the state. We are funded on average daily attendance rather than enrollment. We have seen that post-COVID, some of our students are still, our attendance is not back up to pre-COVID levels, and that's a statewide trend. So that's something that we are facing and we're addressing. The level of school funding per student has remained constant for 4 years since House Bill 3 passed. However, we all know that our costs have been increasing, but our basic allotment amount has not increased. We have seen some taxable value growth in our district, and that's a positive. However, it goes back to the state. It has not remained in the district. So that is another thing that we are one of our challenges. So just to kind of show you, this slide represents how the state funding formula works. As our local property values and our property taxes go up, the state share decreases. So the funding formula takes both of those into account. And on this next slide, you can see that state funding formula determines our entitlement level for the district. Anything over that entitlement level goes back to the state. And that's called recapture or Robin Hood.
How do they determine entitlement level?
So that is part of a formula. It takes our average daily attendance, it takes our property values, it takes all our weighted programs as far as special education, comp ed, all the different special services that we provide. And it's essentially a formula, and it's a very large spreadsheet that we use to determine that, and so that's how the entitlement level is determined. And TEA updates that as they get more current information, PEMS information, property value information. As those are determined, then they update our entitlement amount.
So that's a really important formula.
Yeah.
Very,
Yeah,
yes, very.
I can see that.
Yeah.
And it's driven by average daily attendance And like Jennifer said, student counts for special populations also add to that. We have another slide that we'll show you in a few minutes that kind of shows the last 4 years under House Bill 3. So you'll see how that drives, at least if you back into it, drives an amount of money per student on average daily attendance.
So in this slide, what is represented is for the past 4 years, including the current year we're in, which is obviously we're still in budget. We don't have finals yet. But the yellow in the graph is showing basically our property taxes, our local revenue. The gray is showing recapture. So as our revenues have increased, you can see our portion that we've kept, which is in the yellow, has not increased proportionately. That gray is going away each year, and it's getting bigger. So to turn now to where we are currently, the comptroller, Texas comptroller, has announced that we have a $27 billion surplus, which is much greater than what they anticipated. Property values statewide grew 17%. They had only budgeted a 4% increase. Here in Georgetown, our property values increased 30%. And so we don't really think that trend is going to slow down much. So that is something that as we go into the legislative session in January 2023, they are going into it with a $27 billion surplus.
We want to be reminded, by they we mean the state of Texas,
Right.
it's not us.
Yeah.
Because she said we have a $27 billion surplus. That's not us.
The Texas comptroller has a $27 billion surplus. This is state, these are state funds, not district funds. And so again, as we've talked about, the basic allotment for school districts has not increased, and neither have the weights that we need to serve those special services that we serve our students. And of course, we all know that inflation has increased these last several years, especially this year we're seeing that. And we don't really know what the future for the state's economic situation next year will be.
So even with this huge surplus, they're not making any adjustments?
We will talk about that in a little bit. However, we are not sure. We hope that they will make some. They are also talking about other things to do with that surplus as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk pre-election. Obviously, the election's Tuesday, so people are saying a little bit of everything right now. It's after the elections, and once things start to settle, we'll start understanding what some of the funding priorities will be. We were told by a gentleman last week that of the top 10 priorities in the state, as through some of the polls that have been conducted, education is number 10. And not even, it's barely made the top 10 of some of the priorities of registered voters who've been polled.
Oh.
So there's not a lot of promises that there will be a lot of funding increase. We don't know yet, but it's hard to know exactly where people stand during an election. And we'll get greater clarity on that around January, February. We'll start hearing about possible bills coming out and what the legislation is looking like. There are some that are suggesting you'll see in a moment an increase of the basic allotment. We think that's a given. We just don't know what's going to be attached to the inquiries. So I'll let you.
So we've talked a lot about the basic allotment. This graph just shows that basically we have not seen any growth in the last 4 years since fiscal year 2020. This shows, in addition to our basic allotment, we do get additional funding for our special populations of students that we serve. So again, for the last 4 years, this graph represents the amount that we've received. There's not been much of an increase. It's quite flat.
Mm-hmm.
So this slide is also for the past 4 years, including this year, the budget year that we're in. So 2019 is the first column, 2020, 2021, and then 2022 is the current year that we're in. So the first 3 years are actual numbers, and then we're still in budget for this year. So what we'd like to represent on this so that you can see is that our total operating revenues in the first pink line have increased. However, if you go down to our total operating expenditures, you can also see that they have increased. What has happened is the difference between our total operating revenues and our total operating expenditures has been a negative, which means we've had to use fund balance in order to operate. Now, we have had the fortune of having some one-time land sales, some things that have helped our fund balance, which is in that next line called net other sources. So those have definitely helped us, but what we are facing at the operational level is a deficit.
So is the deficit, you said the difference in the net other sources, so the deficit is what amount on that chart?
The net deficit is the net of these two. So it's going to be more 4 million. What we were representing on this is that just from operating,
Right.
luckily, yes, we are going to have some help to the fund balance with some building sales, but operationally,
Okay,
that's
okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this slide? So as we look at our expenditures that we have in our current year budget, we divide them up into what we call objects or categories. So payroll is represented as a category, and it is it is the blue in this graph. And you can see that payroll is 87% of our operating budget. We also have contracted services that we pay for. We purchase supplies and materials. And then we have some other operating expenditures, training, travel, things like that. And a little bit of capital outlay also. But as percents of the budget, they are much lower than our payroll. So getting back to talking about January 2023, as we just talked about the legislative session coming up, if we have it every 2 years, and it's coming again, they have talked about, there's lots of things out there. As we talked about, the state has a surplus. They've talked about reducing property taxes with a good portion of that. They have potentially talked about a basic allotment increase. However, many times when they do increase that basic allotment, they also tie a mandate to the district of how we need to spend that. So we don't have local control over that. So that's a possibility. We also have heard that there may be some funding for charter schools or school vouchers that are also being considered in this upcoming legislative session, which would take away from school districts. So the organization, Raise Your Hand Texas, has put out some information we thought would be interesting to talk about. Up in the top right, in order to keep pace with inflation, what they have forecasted based on their labor and statistics, we would need a $7,100 basic allotment to cover current inflation. So that would be about $1,000 or 15% higher than what we're having now. So this has been put out as a potential increase to the basic allotment. And then on the bottom left is just a slide that they've put together, a graph showing that Texas, where the Texas flag is, you can see is one of the lowest spending states on public education. So those are two points of interest that we're dealing with when we're talking about the funding for schools. So this is just a recap to talk about what we've done so far and what we have for our next steps. In August, the board did meet and talk about next year's budget. We did discuss budget with our DLT in October, just last week. And then throughout November and December, we're gonna have some ongoing budget meetings that we have scheduled. And then in January, we're gonna bring back a status report to the board. And then in February, March, going on into April, May, June, we'll be finalizing some budget decisions.
The biggest complexity on finalizing budget, we're trying to get you the staffing numbers we think we'll need and all of those points by March. And then also wondering what will happen with the legislative session. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm thinking 2019, they didn't finalize House Bill 3 until June?
Yeah.
May?
We've
Yeah.
already adopted it.
So,
Yeah, we amended, big amendment after the fact, because we didn't know what
Right.
the numbers would be.
so we'll just keep you guys informed as the process evolves with the legislature, whether or not they're gonna make adjustments, what we think they're gonna make adjustments to, but we're building forward as if there's a $9 million deficit that we need to try to reduce down as much as we possibly can based on current funding models, and then go from there. So,
That's all we have. Are there any other questions?
For the notebook.
Yes.
I think you got it.
As we meet again, we'll add to your notebooks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very informative.
Yes.
Not all good news, but.
Your visuals are really.
Yes,
Okay.
excellent, thank you.
It's walk-up music, right? It's walk-up music.
Oh, we talked about that
Yeah,
with
walk-up
PTA.
song, yeah, yeah.
Most of which one of appropriate for meetings. Do we, I feel like I do want to turn this just a little, just so I'm not sitting right in front of it. You all have the slides.
Yes.
You're boxing me out. I'd like you as my support chair, just right there, right there. That's weird. It's like a roller coaster, but. All right.
All righty. We will go ahead and get started talking about district improvement plan. So just going to kind of recap a few things, and then we'll jump in and have some conversation for sure. So, and as usual, just stop me where we're going and let's ask some questions. Kind of wanted to just position kind of where we've been and kind of what you guys have been up to in terms of campus plans, district plans, that kind of stuff. But so far you've received or reviewed the full campus plans or strategies. That was last month. You approved those campus plans as well, the goals and performance objectives. You've received and reviewed the district goals and performance objectives. Officially, those came with the plan last week, but those are the same goals and performance objectives. I really wanted to say POs. Those are the same goals and POs that we've been sharing with you guys over the last several weeks. And then received a full district improvement plan. Hopefully you clicked on the short link and not the 129-page link. But I wanted you to see the full kit and caboodle, if you like. Sorry about that. There you go. Draw response. So just quick notes. The Board of Trustees annually adopts the goals and the POs of our district and campus plans which you guys have already seen and approved. They're aligned to the strategic plan, the GISD board goals, as well as our mission and just other GISD priorities. And then finally, these plans are also developed in accordance with our GISD District of Innovation plan. Just quick things about the planning process. Like we discussed last month, the process is very similar to the campus plans, comprehensive needs assessment, planning and kind of strategizing phase, and then an input phase. And so with the district plan, that input phase involves the district performance committee, as well as other district leaders that are responsible for different departmental work that are reflected in the plan. So quickly, the goals are from our GISD strategic plan. So those are written just like you see them on the screen. Those are the 4 goals. Just a reminder, these are the goals that we're looking at in the strategic planning process. And so what these reflect now, I suspect in the future they might be a little bit different maybe, or at least just language possibly. And then those performance objectives, just a quick glance at your handout. So you've got the specific language in writing right there, just to save on slide space. But these are the topics of all of the different performance objectives, not different from what you saw in the campus improvement plans, but comprehensive. So whereas our elementary schools didn't have a CCMR directly, or for example, they didn't have an 8th grade performance objective at our elementary schools, and then vice versa. Whereas the district plan has the 3rd grade stuff, has the 8th grade stuff, has the CCMR stuff, and then has the rest of the kind of the comprehensive. So that would be the only difference between the POs from a campus level to our district level, and that was intentional so that we would have really strong alignment between our campus work as well as our district work. We don't want to be identifying work that is not aligned to the campus needs. So jumping in, just looking at a quick example, and then you've got access to these digitally, but this is just an example of a goal, performance objective number 4, and then we can look at some strategies. I wanted to show this one specifically because we've got some 5-year goals that are at the performance objective level that are part of the board goals. We've also got annual targets that are built in. So this one is around 3rd grade literacy. And so the ultimate goal is that 3rd grade literacy 100% by the end of 2025 for all of our 3rd graders using multiple measures. This just teases out the annual targets. So where we want to be for next year, or this year, right, into 2023, with regards to each of those different metrics. And so we've got the passing standard, the meeting or mastering grade level standard, we've got our MAP growth assessment, and then our our teacher standards-based assessment measures as well. The strategies, so looking at this special education department, providing funds to support professional learning. Jump here and just got a couple of additional strategies to let you take a peek at those, but this is an example of what you saw in the plan, but that goal, performance objective, and then strategies nestled underneath that PO. And this is then replicated, I don't know, something to the tune of about 65 times in the plan for different POs and strategies and so forth. But, so more than anything, we wanted to just kind of do that quick rundown, but then provide an opportunity for us to either have a conversation, ask questions, kind of open the floor to you guys.
I was delighted to go through your shortened version.
You didn't have through 129 pages.
And seeing all the data that you've embedded in there. I want to thank you all for doing that. That'll make it a whole lot easier at the end of the year for me to feel like we have done what we needed to do. I know it's a struggle. I know it's an uphill battle, but
Sure.
hopefully we get more volunteers to help.
I appreciate the fact that we really talked about in the last 2 meetings about things being specific and measurable. And I really appreciate how on the performance objective, particularly number 4, and some of them are measuring the academics, that you broke it down by year. I think that way you can really look at to see how much progress has been made in 1 year.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. And just a reminder highlight on those. This year is the first year we've looked at the 8th grade literacy and numeracy in the multiple measures concept. So we're kind of establishing some baseline. So I suspect that over the next couple of months or so, we'll know more about what that final calculation can look like, and we'll share that with you guys.
Was that the reason on the maps there was an XX on percentage?
Yes, and I just forgot to put the number in there. I have that number, because that was one that wasn't readily available, and so it was my placeholder.
I guess they hadn't figured it out yet.
Good thing this is a
What
draft.
XX looked
Right.
like, yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Hey, a lot of this root cause analysis relates back to COVID, and we're still fighting our way through that.
Mm-hmm.
Have we got enough data yet to kind of see how bad that hole is and how much longer that's gonna be the bane of our existence?
I think if we did, we could sell that nugget of wisdom, for a pretty good price. I think the challenge is going to be how long will it take?
Right.
The interesting thing is,
Like, we're starting to see what that gap is now.
yeah, reading recovery is coming along a little bit quicker than the math piece, and so and what we're finding is that it depends on the grade level even to which the specific gaps are, whether that's elementary or middle school and high school. But as far as your question about how long or how much the gap is,
Both. Like, it looks like we're starting to get the data to see how big that gap is from some of this. Now it becomes the work of how long? Is that kind of the phase we're at with this now?
Yeah, I think, we haven't had a year yet where there hasn't been an impact, right?
For sure.
So everything we think we start wrapping our heads around, then, heck, last week we had campuses highly impacted by the flu, right? And as soon as we think we're wrapping our heads around getting kids back and having them in class and, okay, let's start, then it feels like there's been something. So I think probably every doctoral level dissertation over the next decade is going to be written around certain aspects of this, because there are interesting nuances about, to Wes's point, it's not math across the board. There are moments where there's a transition in the type of thinking that a student is expected to do in math in certain grade levels.
Sure.
So if you happen to be in those grades in a time during the pandemic that was particularly difficult, you might be more impacted than if you were in the grade above or below, simply because that's really the transition year between thinking additively to multiplicatively. And that's just this, these interesting moments of, the fraction situation that we keep seeing, because it's in our documents in January every year, and January has been this moment. And so I think we're going to see these interesting slices of ways that it wasn't holistically impacting everybody. It was, these really targeted moments of, like, if you happen to be this grade at this time. And then that's not even taking into account any of the social emotional aspects of, regardless of all that, was your family intact? Was the situation at home okay? Were you, so yeah, I think we're going to be studying this for a long time. On the plus side, I think, we'll see what the legislative session does. The infusion of federal dollars has been helpful to at least try and stop some holes a little bit. It has allowed our district to buy resources, to align interventions, to use some things that I think we won't see the impact immediately, but a couple years from now, we're going to see that the efforts that were put in because of the federal dollars here and the efforts of people realizing what a trauma kids were going through, we're going to see those impacts a couple years down the line of, it could have been even worse, and we were able to help that.
I was just going to add, pandemic impact on the workforce will be the lingering, that we'll never know, and kind of hard to create a exact moment. Makes it even more complicated to create an exact moment of when did the impact end, because of exactly how it impacted the workforce.
And what's going to be more enjoyable, not trying to pile on this thing, but the accountability system is changing this spring.
Yeah.
And the commissioner was at a meeting with Region 13, and these guys can quote it better than me, but the message was, you cannot compare this current year to next year. I'm sorry, the new assessment to the old. And so A through F will be determined differently, and you'll be tempted to say, oh, that campus went from a B to an A, but that's really not even the same thing. And yet people will be tempted to go down that road.
So we're essentially getting a brand new baseline.
New baseline.
That is, and so we don't know.
Yeah, and so the whole purpose I asked is just
Yeah.
reading through the district improvement plans and everything, just trying to, we have these goals 2025 and whatever, we have all these long-term goals, but in reality, we're still trying to figure out the impact and work our way through that. And so even though we're setting these goals and trying to achieve these things, the conversation still has to kind of include the fact that we really don't know. We're best guessing our way through parts of this. And I think as we start unrolling that impact, it'll just be nice to roll into our goals as we start doing our strategic planning for 5 years from now, like what's the reality we're really dealing with? You know, kids that missed fractions in 8th grade, when they get to algebra, they're gonna struggle. I mean, there's gonna be a different struggle than generations before them, so. Okay, I was just curious.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
Another conundrum, especially for those littles, you know, 3rd and younger, is they have had very few real years of quality instruction.
Right.
So being able to separate out those that just have learning loss or missed a curriculum issue versus those that may have a barrier or disability. And do we have the option of hiring more interventionists that can help in those areas, behaviorally as well as mathematically?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. And unfortunately, we're in a situation in some campuses where our interventionists are in classrooms right now because we couldn't hire classroom teachers. So I think there's going to be a lot for us to look at. We met with our special education department 2 weeks ago. Because exactly what you're saying, the rules changed around identification with special education, and so now, as long as a student shows a gap in learning, their cognitive profile does not have to indicate that there's an issue. They just have to have a gap in learning, and so that's basically everybody, right? Like, who doesn't have a gap in learning right now? So we're at an interesting place that we don't know what to do with that, because really we have to figure out how to identify whether a student is even coming to us because they missed curriculum, they missed a year of solid learning and reading, but they don't have any cognitive profile elements that would indicate an issue. They could still qualify for special education, but at that point then we have to figure out how do we get them caught up and exited so that they're not
Or
you know.
have a whole bunch more in the RTI tier 2.
Yeah. But exactly, and right now, because of learning loss, I mean, our triangles are not triangles, right? They are rectangles of pillars of the way that, because everybody lost something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is missing some aspect of their learning over the last several years, and so the typical ideal of this pyramid that most have what they need, and then you've got a tier that needs some intervention in the classroom, and then a tier that will need specific supports. It's really wonky at this point because everybody missed something. Everybody has some gap that needs to be filled in. So our teams have been working really hard to figure out how we push intervention back down the other way, because the model used to be able to work pretty decently, that you could do some intervention in the classroom and then you pulled out and you did specific targeted intervention for those 5% that needed that. Well, our percentages, across the state in Georgetown ISD are not what they were prior to the pandemic. And so your system can't really support that same model with those numbers in the way that they are. And so that team has been working really hard on figuring out how do you then push in really targeted intervention in your normal classroom instruction, because you can't send those kids out to do that anymore. There's too many. Everybody needs it. There's too many. Which is also another reason why resource alignment and some of the work that our coordinators have been doing too with aligning, and we'll talk about it with the BOI data, aligning BOI data to the modules in Zern and Amplify that the students can then get on during tier 1, during stations in tier 1 time is really critical, because we need to use that time as targeted intervention time as well.
Do you ever break out this data gender specific? I've seen it all the other ways, but I haven't seen it gender yet.
Yeah.
Can
I
I
have.
repeat your question, Cody?
Yeah.
If they break out this data gender specific ever, if you have a lot of girls in a particular class, sometimes 3rd grade girls might read better than 3rd grade boys, so they're going to score better in reading as a whole.
We're going to slice it by gender.
Yeah.
Yep.
We can do that and kind of let you know what we find.
Yeah.
Just curious.
All righty, we'll keep on rolling. So we need to visit a little bit about Frost's targeted improvement plan. So as we talked, I think it was last maybe board meeting, we talked a little bit about Frost plan or just kind of what they've been going through. So it's required per federal accountability in domain 3 of our accountability system. That's one that analyzes performance of different student groups over time. And so Back in 2018, 2019, Frost, the performance of the different student groups had Frost labeled as comprehensive support and intervention or improvement from 2018, 2019. And so they have implemented a TIP plan or a target improvement plan since that point. And then this past year, their scores indicated what's called a progress campus. And so their scores would have removed that label, but the label is a 2-year label. And all of the years prior to this year haven't counted. So those are kind of on pause. So this label is a 2018, 2019 kind of holdover. So just keep that in mind. I think to Jennifer's point, that's another point of interest. So just a little bit about their TIP plan. It focuses on 3 priority areas. Those priority areas are selected in kind of a collaborative effort with Tamara, her instructional leadership team, myself working with her, as well as Region 13 folks that kind of do what's called a diagnostic visit and identify specific areas. But there's a lot of local ownership on what those actual areas are. So these are the 3 areas that were selected as focus areas. So compelling aligned vision, mission, goals, values, focus on a safe environment, high expectations, daily use of high quality instructional materials aligned to instructional planning calendars and interim and formative assessments, and then data-driven instruction. So each of those essential actions then have action steps, so kind of similar concept with our other plans of goals, performance objectives, and strategies. They've got the essential actions and then action steps nestled under each one. And those steps are kind of built on a quarterly basis. So quarter 1, here's the steps. Quarter 2, here are the predicted steps, and so on and so forth. And then they've got specific data goals identified that they monitor quarterly. And these plans are monitored quarterly. Tamara and I get to have a conversation with our Region 13 folks and TEA folks about once every 2 to 3 months, and they're delightful. I see Tamara nodding her head, she's enjoying it too. But essentially, we just look at progress. We take feedback from those folks as well, and then just monitor progress as we're going. Towards the end of the year, then there's kind of a more larger wrap-up of that plan. So wanted to share that with you guys. We will bring this to you, I guess it's next week at the board meeting for approval. It's already been submitted to TEA because it's part of an iterative process where we submit it to them, they give feedback, we make adjustments and that kind of piece. These are just an example. So pulled this from the Essential Action 4.1, daily use of high quality instructional materials. So this is just an example action step. You provide lesson plan templates that can be customized according to teacher preference and need, but ensure necessary documentation skills, focus areas, as well as formative assessment plans and strategies. And so this is a good example of how Tamara and her team have taken kind of recommendations and molded it to fit for her campus. And so specifically, templates that can be customized, right? That idea, when you start standardizing specific things into a lesson plan, you start to remove kind of some of the art and craft of teaching. And so that's an aspect where she wants to provide a support and then, a template and then support the option for customization. A couple more strategies or action steps in this language. Design days scheduled for all grade levels and departments. And so this is essentially the use of time, right? This is carving out time where it doesn't exist, because that's a real bang for the buck to be able to get teachers together to be able to make the planning and design decisions. And the last one is admin, conducting walkthroughs, providing feedback for all classroom teachers. And so just a great practice to ensure that there's fidelity to the expectations and to the models. But just wanted to share these examples. You've got a link to it also. Any questions or comments on that?
I especially like the cover photo.
Yeah, the polar bear.
Yeah. No, it's well done.
Yes.
It's well done, yeah. It's a lot of work, but it sort of looks like it's really paying off.
Yep.
So congratulations.
Good stuff.
Thanks.
Your turn.
Thanks, y'all. Okay, so next on the list is the district professional learning plan. So I am going to switch a little over so you can see. I sent this to y'all in the weekly on Friday. Oh, there we go. So as a reminder, DMA local, you guys approved that in the October board meeting, and so this changed language about the requirements from you guys to review and approve the professional learning plan for the district annually. So in future years, this will happen prior to the school year starting, but with the way that the timing of the legislation came out and the approval of the board policy, here we are in November. So this is not approving all the professional learning that we do in the district. This is approving specific things. Particularly, it's all of the requirements that the legislatures put into every 2 years, laws that say you will be trained in sexual harassment, you will be trained in Title IX, you will be trained in all of these things. So that's what we're approving here, and what the DMA local asks is that you compare these to what the State Board of Education has put together as a clearinghouse of recommendations of best practices. Some of those are more robust than others. It feels like they kind of just linked other stuff in there and said, hey, you can look here. But I'm happy to say that everything that we do that needs to be aligned to the clearinghouse recommendations meets all of those recommendations. So, like I said, this plan covers some of the everything that needs to be in the plan, but it's not an exhaustive list. We use Safe Schools, Vectors, they've kind of switched names over the last couple of years, as our software that we use to do most of these trainings, although some of the trainings are done in person, and then for different subgroups of our staff, our HR department does a lot of these trainings, like they'll go out to our child nutrition services and do most of these trainings so that they don't have to sit for 6 hours on a computer to do them. They're all done over the summer because a handful of them have to have a law that you have to have them by the first day of school, and so we make all of them do at that point or within 30 days of hire. And then what's not included on the list are things that are done on an as-needed basis. So an example of that would be if you have to do a restraint on a student, then there's a requirement for having a training on that again after you've done that. Those aren't listed in there. Those are things that we do on an as-needed basis when situations arise. So I know it's hard to see, and I know when you looked at it, I mean, it's a working document, both of which that we use because it is a massive amount of training that we have to do. And as any person in our district will tell you, every 2 years, it gets bigger and bigger, and they never take anything off the list. And so this list has grown and grown and grown. On the plus side, we have found ways, and I think a lot of that has been due to COVID, we've found ways that we can allow for pre-testing and testing out, and people showing their mastery in different ways, so that, because it is a lot of hours on modules to go through all of these things. And so we have both a new hire plan, because there's some things that you have to have before you start, or maybe you only have to have once, and then these are the yearly different things that have to go through our compliance training. And then when we talked about this last workshop, the question was asked, well, what about all the other professional learning? So I did attach for you our working document that we use to kind of keep track of all of the, and not even all of the things, because that's not even including any campus-led professional learning, but at least at the district level, the professional learning that we provide. And this is just a snapshot of some of the rows of how we're doing it, so that it helps us keep an eye on if we're pulling people too much, or what we're doing in certain months. It also helps us year after year kind of keep a running record of what we're doing, and it helps inform our district improvement plan as well, because a lot of the efforts and strategies go through aspects of professional learning. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys had a snapshot of that document as well. Questions on professional learning?
Looks good.
It's a lot of stuff. Alright. It is. It's my favorite part.
The second half.
Yeah, the other stuff, the compliance training is awful. It's
The other stuff, yes.
Alrighty, so just provided the BOY data to you in handout, so that's the second and third page of the handout that has this one. So we've got, so this is in-class amplified is the really colorful document, so that is the new-ish literacy assessment.
In-class?
That's in-class, that's correct.
It's on the,
Yeah, kind of the smallest handout that you have.
It's not in a binder.
No binder this time. Yep, so this is in-class amplified. This is used K through 5 for literacy. This is a new-ish, I say new-ish. Last year, we were using it K through 2. This year, you'll see on the data that there is some data for grade 3, 4, and 5 from last year, and that was a piloted effort to see if we wanted to roll it up beyond grades K through 2. And then the second sheet is math growth, and that is in math. So I think we joked about this last time. We got this for this and this for this and
So
so
this is
forth.
reading and math.
That's right. So this is kind of split off as reading and math. So the colorful chart is reading, the map is math. So just some orienting. So what you have on the in-class information is you also have last year's information as well as this year BOY. So you've got BOY, MOY, and BOY, bless you, each of the grade levels. And then you've got this year BOY, which is that bottom bar chart, 22, 23 running through there. You're looking at red and yellow as below benchmark, and then blue and green as at or above the benchmark for that grade level. And then on the map side of things, what you're looking at is in the top half, a very confusing table. I apologize for that. This is how kind of map shares it with us. But that looks at some achievement data on the top half of the table. The bottom is looking at growth. And so that is our growth at per grade level compared to the national norms of 2020. So pre-COVID norms, that's what that kind of golden diamond is. So our observed growth by grade level compared to the norms. So we wanted to
compare
go ahead.
fall of 21 to fall
Fall
of
of 21 to
22.
fall of 22 is what this comparison period is. That's correct. Yep. Yep.
And so what we want on the graph at the bottom, we want the diamond to be within the blue square, like fourth grade is. Is that the goal?
Ideally, and that's so when looking at that's why the benefit of this sheet is that it looks at two things. It looks at achievement and growth, and so the bottom one is growth only.
Right.
So technically,
For that same group of kids that moved up a grade level. Is that correct?
yes, this is looking at fall 21 to fall 22 BOY change in score.
Of the same kids.
Same kids.
Of the same kid?
That's right.
It's
Yes.
cohort.
Yep.
Okay.
Cohorted. And so the reason I say on your question is, low growth may correlate to high achievement. High growth, not may, does correlate often to, where would I go to? Did I say high growth?
Yes.
High growth, low achievement. No, not always. Ideally, we would love to see high growth, high achievement, kind of that quadrant effect, that top right quadrant. So that's where I wouldn't say that we only want to see where the diamond is inside the blue bar, because that may indicate that we've got really, really low performance, low achievement performance, but we've got high growth, which is a positive, but there's kind of the asterisk to it aspect. So that's where kind of looking up at fourth grade, for example, on the top, if you look, find the far left column, grade 4, you'll see the fall 22 achievement percentile is pretty high.
Yeah.
So the 62nd achievement percentile is 12 points higher than the norm being the 50th percentile.
Well, and anything between the 25th and the 75th percentile is considered average. So they all, that's just statistically, it would be if we made them into a standard score, it would be 90 to 110. So the achievement percentiles are actually pretty good.
Right. So we wanted to share this with you guys. I can certainly kind of answer your questions about this or follow up if you've got additional questions. We also wanted to share a little bit about kind of how this information is used in the classroom and in our campuses. And really it depends on what the teachers are learning from it, but ultimately they're using it to inform instruction and grouping and interventions. And so just kind of what it looks like is using data to inform Tier 1 classroom instruction or classroom instruction that all students receive. Also forming groups of students to target specific instructional supports. So they can break down, they do break down this information more specifically by skill area, and then may work with a group of 4 or 5 students on a specific skill area to bolster that. That's what this information is also used for. And then also aligning it to intervention resources. And so they're able to take information from either in-class or MAP and align it to specific either activities or lessons in resources. ZERN is one of them. Amplify, the program that actually they do the assessment in, the colorful one, there's also an intervention resource. So imagine based on this information, students should engage in these particular activities. And so that's what this information is used for, largely at the classroom level. Terry, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Okay, can I say something? Ask a question about in-class. So is in-class a national assessment? In other words, are these based upon national norms, or is this a Texas thing, or what is in-class?
I believe it's based in Texas technically, but I don't believe that it's limited to Texas in terms of the data source, where we get data.
It's
National.
Yeah, I would think it would be national. And so the same thing so when you're making comparisons, or you're making percentiles or whatever, you're doing it on a national database.
Right, like, what's expected, what is below benchmark at, those are normed kind of benchmark points.
Okay.
Right.
And so if these were done before 2020, then are the norms based upon pre-COVID? So are we comparing kids now that based upon norms that were done before COVID? Because if you say, well, no, it was after COVID, I mean, after 2020, then the kids you are assessing also had the effects of COVID. But if you're not talking about that, if you're talking about before 2020, then you're basing this comparison with kids that were not impacted by
Right.
COVID. So do you know
So
that?
MAP for sure uses pre-COVID norms. So those norms were actually published February 2020, which means they were collected well before. I'm looking to the corner. Yeah, we'll double check and see when the norming data for Amplify. I would suspect that it was just based on legislation of House Bill 3 is when M-Class Amplify kind of was brought to the forefront. It was one of the required literacy screeners that came out of House Bill 3, which that was 2019, so I suspect that the norms were established 2019 or prior. But we can check on that, we'll check.
I'm just curious.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it certainly...
I knew maps,
Right.
but I didn't know about this.
Certainly impacts the way you think about the benchmarking and the standards, for sure.
That's right.
Yep.
Wes, do you know if the MAP results have been pushed out to parents yet for the students?
Oh, that's a good question.
As a parent, they're in
Yes.
Skyward.
Yes.
I think I got a Skyward email that said my kids'
Okay.
scores were available.
Hey, don't try to make the rest of us parents look bad.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yeah.
I was about to say, I'm a parent too.
She threw
Is
us
it
all
different
under
by
the bus
campus,
at
do you know?
once.
'Cause I'm in Skyward.
Should all be the same.
It can be just because the window is broad, and so when a campus finishes up.
Okay,
But
so they're starting to trickle out
Yeah,
there.
I'll double check on that.
Side down at the bottom.
So when is the window open for middle of the year?
Good thing.
I'm
Deb's
looking to
over
the
here.
corner again. The window
The
for
middle of the year
MOI.
window?
Okay, so before we leave for break, probably sometime, you're pretty quick.
And then is it closed in January to have carefully done?
Yeah, I think it's ended after Thanksgiving break and until we leave, and then it closes.
Got a
We'll
big-
get the exact date.
big calendar
We
that
had
has all
pushed it
this.
last year. I feel like we had pushed it because it
It was
was,
January.
right. Yes.
So many absences.
So we control that window, and so when pandemics happen, chaos happens, then we have a little bit of flexibility to be able to change that for our campuses.
Yeah, December 1st through the 16th. So it'll be for a good Christmas for MOI. All right. Any other questions?
When I saw your first slide, I thought, wow, you guys came up with my gender stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah, we're like,
The data
there
on
we
that.
go, just.
Didn't see anything from her one.
Yeah. That's correct.
So the next one, we had some charts that were distributed and we requested to discuss at this meeting, and so,
I get to do it.
yeah.
Stephanie, can I get you for a step there?
I hope you do what you need.
Yeah, you can, and then.
Take one pass on, or no, this is Jen's copy.
That's the one I'm
Does it have the answers on it?
So,
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Educated in that field.
Oh, no, we're not. Yeah. They did say
Well, I appreciate it.
So we may not need a rest.
we have to.
Yeah, we're nice, I guess if Stephanie ducked out to the restroom, do you want to take the restroom break?
Sure.
Since you just got out of the car and ran in here.
I came from north of Dallas.
Really? Oh, wow.
What's the weather like?
Usually it goes out.
No, I didn't. Let's follow her to the bottom.
I'm going to take a minute to pass everything out. Oh, that's okay.
What part of it?
You get 60 miles northwest of Fitchburg. Yeah, it's a little sawmill type remaining
Did a little.
operation I'm looking at buying.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go through, maybe 15 minutes back.
Let's start back up.
Looking at the length of the agenda today, I'm really kind of
It sort of goes
surprised
Frisco,
about the
Prosper,
desk,
Salina,
because
and
there's so
then,
much.
like, Gunther's the next one. It's all going like crazy.
All right, we're gonna start back up.
Considering the length of the agenda, I'm really kind of surprised we even got to this, because there was so much on that, that we needed to take care of. And I'm glad that we'll probably take maybe 15 minutes or something like that and go on from there. I appreciate Dr. Brent sending this out, and I'm sure that Dr. Brent appreciated me not asking for all of this information and to be compiled, because it looked like y'all had a really busy month. So, one of the things that I'm always curious to look at is I love looking at it. I love looking at all of our results and our data based upon, what's going on within our region, and also looking at what's going on within the state. So one of the things that we've talked about as a board is how much we would love to be able to discuss things. So this is kind of our opportunity to talk to each other. So I've given you a copy, and basically the top sheet is looking at STAR 2022, and it's looking at grades 3 through 8. And it is just simply looking at English language arts and mathematics, although I spent some time last night kind of looking at science and social studies, because I don't know that I've spent a whole lot of time looking at that. But what I'd like to spend some time looking at is getting a sense of where we are. And this, that's the reason I asked the question about maps and in class was there's not any other place where we can look at everybody else had COVID also. So the kids in the region and the kids in the state, when we're in comparison, also had COVID. So it's more of an apples to apples kind of deal. So what I'd like us to do, just to kind of start with, is to go through the first chart and look to see what areas we were equal to or higher than the state or the region. Now, on the first column, on the does not meet, so if you look at English language arts, the state score was 23, Region 13 score was 20, and GISD was 25. So we don't want in our does not meet, ideally ours would be lower. But so those we don't want to be higher. But if you look at approaches, in third grade English language art, the state was 77, Region 13 was 80, and GISD was 75. And remember on approaches, I think to me it's kind of shifted a little bit. It started off that it wasn't looked at as being on grade level if you were approaches, but that I think has shifted in the last 2 or 3 years, and that is considered to be on grade level. Or not, I guess barely meeting grade levels. I guess barely meeting grade level would be a better way to put it. Is that what you understand?
It's more like it's approaching grade level.
Approaching.
I thought approaching meant that you were below grade level, but you had a 50% probability of being at grade level the next year.
Yeah,
Is it that intricate?
Yeah, that they had a magic wand that we think this kid will be.
Will be at grade level next year.
Yeah, right. So if you just simply take the approaches and you subtract that from 100, that's where you get the did not meet. So if you'll go through this, and then meets, of course, meets grade level, solidly meets grade level, and then masters is above grade level work. So what I always do with mine is I just walk through and I just highlight the scores where we are equal to or above the state or the region. So you want to take a few minutes and do that, and then we'll talk about, then maybe the next thing would be to look at which ones, if there's any concern, which one you want to talk about on the numbers.
What do you guys consider statistically significant?
Well, I'm just saying, is it 59 and 59 or 60 and 60?
Right, but are we going to talk about things that are 1% off, or
Yeah, we can talk about that. That's the kind of thing we want to talk about. Yeah.
But what do you want the focus to be? Because there's not going to be time to go line item by line item through this thing today. Like, do you want to target the biggest gaps? Is that what your largest concern?
That may be exactly what we need, but we have to study it first. And maybe that's what you want, Mark, James, is.
Yeah, I was just curious what you thought process was.
Kind of aligns with what they were telling us too. The areas of critical need, yeah.
That's a good question as to what is statistically significant, but I just picked, this is completely random, 2% difference, within 2% difference. And it's pretty striking under do not meet, we're at 2% on English language just about every grade. But math, none.
Which is what Terry and Wes and all them just said, is that our math
Math
seems
is
to have
the problem.
suffered the most.
I agree.
Except there's a bright spot, so look for the bright spot in that. I just found the bright spot.
7th grade? Oh,
Yeah, 7th grade, English language is good.
No, math,
No.
the math is good as well, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's not very good.
ELA.
Speak Texan. But what does masters tell us?
The masters? Above grade.
I
Above
mean,
grade level.
above grade level.
Above grade level
Okay,
masters.
so really, what we would be really concerned about is meeting grade level. If we could have everybody at grade level, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
In my mind, yes.
And being above grade level, I mean, whoopee, but that's not as important as the other.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so what's your thoughts so far?
Well, we've got math work to do.
Math.
Is there any other area that you see to be significant?
6th grade,
6th grade, in what area, Cody?
in general.
Both.
I mean, if you look across the board, especially math, but
Yeah, both of them, yeah.
Pretty big gaps there.
yeah, I highlighted everything with 9 or, in 9 or 10, 9 plus.
That was your
Yeah.
That was mine.
big gap.
Yeah, big gaps.
Yeah. Look down the meets. If you look at the meets and then you compare it to the Region 13, and remember that GISD, when we did this, we had about 35% economically disadvantaged, and Region 13 has about 43%. So they have more than we do. And then the state has got 60. So if you look at the meets, if you go down GISD on the meets on this top page, we're pretty significantly different than the Region 13. Except in
7th grade.
except in 7th grade.
Isn't that interesting that there's that much difference
Yeah.
between 6th grade and 7th grade?
Yeah. And I think that's what Terry said, setting
Yes.
up here, she just
Uh-huh.
said, it's not across the board, it's, yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Anything else that you want to talk about on that first top page?
I think it just really reinforces what they just presented.
Okay, what about the next page? Turn to the next page, and that's end of course. Oh, boy. So I would only look at table 1. I wouldn't look at the top of. So what do you see? It's set up the very same way, did not meet, approaches, meets, and masters. What do you see there?
I guess that the fainter type is good and the darker type is not so good. Or is it,
Yeah, I think,
in other words, region 13 biology, the region was 17%, but we were 14% did not meet. So that's better. That's good.
Correct.
right.
Okay.
Right.
But Eastview was 24 as
Right.
compared to 17, so that's not so good.
Correct.
Is that right? Am I reading this right?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, the high school kids, they not only weren't necessarily present to get the instruction, but to play high school. You know, it's a whole different bailiwick.
But I would also say.
And English
that-
1 is a
that-
freshman, right? Am I correct? English 1 is a freshman? Yeah.
Well, it looks like that the scores statewide are lower.
Yeah,
I mean, because you are
Yeah.
comparing apples to apples. These-
Yep.
Even across the state, they have COVID.
yep. That is true.
So which one really?
Ooh,
Well, once again, the math scores.
Yeah.
Well, actually, there's only
Oh,
one math score, it's
English.
algebra. But
English looks pretty bad too. English 1 and 2.
I imagine they've really got some work that they're doing in that area.
I would think.
Can I make one comment?
Please,
Yeah.
please,
Um,
please.
Your Algebra 1 scores are, at the region state, are every kid who tested Algebra 1.
Right,
This is only our
Our
high school
school.
kids, which
Yeah.
means all of our advanced academic students who took it in 8th grade are not included in these
Oh.
numbers.
True.
So that's
good
one of-
point, yeah.
So that helps to understand the reason why the school, because it's so significantly lower than anything
Right,
else.
right.
Good point.
So that's,
Okay.
that's not including our 7th and 8th graders who take
So
the
what
Algebra
would you
test.
say that, if you were just to say, do you have any, can you guesstimate what that would be?
Guesstimate what would be.
What, I mean, I'm sure you maybe even looked at it,
Mhm.
to say, what is the score then? If you look at approaches, let's say.
Yeah, I think I don't want to misquote, but I think it's around 61% for approaches and above.
Okay,
I'll have to get that to you.
Okay,
But
okay.
yeah, I
Just
think it's
ballpark.
somewhere around there. Yeah.
okay, okay.
So is it, Terry, is it just the math that kids in middle school can take? Just math?
Yeah.
Not
They tend
English
to not
1 or
take any of
2?
the
Oh,
other
really?
ones.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
You guys will just join us.
They would be little, yeah, just sit down.
Hello.
You
Well,
have-
I just
I don't want it to be a.
You have the
that
info.
right there, Terry being able to pop in and say, hey, I see this looks really bad and scary, but it's an outlier, and she's able to explain why.
Yes.
Shows me that they are already well aware of kind of the underlying trends and matters of extenuation and mitigation,
For sure.
which is what we trust them to do.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah,
So, thank you, Terry.
so that we can understand what it is. Yeah, that's awesome.
That's a
Okay.
very good point.
So my problem with this is, it's great, but it takes us too long to get this data the way we do it now. Like
Pardon
it takes too long to get this information. It's all reactive. So really what becomes our correlation to this data and how does that correlate to your maps and your other stuff that we can actually inform our teachers and give them a resource instead of just coming back behind them and second guessing what we've already done, because that's all this really allows us to
Right.
do the way they test right now.
Correct.
That's my frustration with the STAR testing, is it's just a backward snapshot. It doesn't, it's like going and saying, oh, I lost $1 million last year in my business. Well, that doesn't do me any good, like. by
But
that
what
point,
does
I'm
it
already-
force you to do if you lost $1 million in your business last year?
Find out where it
Probably
went.
file bankruptcy.
So do we?
Close shop and go home.
It helps you to figure
But
out what did I need to do.
The point is, in business, you would never do that. You would never wait that
Like
long,
he
just
was
like these
saying,
teachers
yeah.
aren't
Formative
doing that.
assessment, but we don't have
I
a
mean,
district-wide
probably
formative
this should be,
assessment
you've
for
been
high
looking
school
at this
unless
stuff in August.
they choose to do
Yeah.
their own
Yeah,
assessment.
I agree.
Yeah. and
But that's my
what-
curiosity. Have you looked at this stuff to see how much correlation between the areas of concern there is with the data we're seeing here? That we can actually be reactive from and proactive from,
I think
opposed to
there was
reactive?
another chart that correlated the end of year maps with
There
the
was.
STAR.
There was.
And sometimes maps kind of overblew how many would be in a certain category, and sometimes it underblew, and sometimes it was spot on, so it seemed to be kind of,
But both are very similar type of assessment,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, it's, MAP is basically a STAR test, but given 3 times a year,
Right, which gives you a more useful tool to actually manage and correct deficiencies from.
I mean, I think that, in my opinion,
And if we're using this well,
yeah,
it
yes.
should reflect, to your point, here at some point.
Absolutely.
and that one, the
Or
second
we
one
wouldn't be using
is
that.
end of course. So I asked Terry, will you tell him what you told me about formative assessment? And
Oh, yeah, so,
High school.
I mean, teachers get formative assessments at the high school level. We don't have aggregated data, beginning of year, mid-year, unless the campus is doing the STAR interim assessment. So, they're monitoring this on their campus for that. And I think that to me is one point that, Wes and I got to go to hear, Commissioner Morath last week at Region 13. And I think there's a push to think about any of the grade levels prior to end of course as being a formative assessment. I mean, the problem is we look at those as like, did you hit 3rd grade? Well, 3rd grade's not a thing, right? Like the goal is that you exit them well prepared to go out into the world and they've learned what they need to learn. And so if anything, if your elementary numbers are not as ideal, but you end up getting your end of course numbers to where you want them, it means your teachers and your staff are doing yeoman's work in order to closing gaps from where the kids started at the elementary grades and to where they end up. And so even in the conversation, I think they're trying to think of ways that they can shift the A through F accountability system to understand that the 3rd grade EOI, although it's an EOI, is a formative assessment of this kid's 12 years of learning.
And
And-
every kid in 3rd grade isn't the same as
And then
every
it's
kid in
used,
3rd
and
grade.
it's used as a mark to say, so if the end goal is 12 years down, is down the road, what information does it tell us that we can, because it isn't bankruptcy, we can't,
Right, you
we don't get
couldn't
to just say like, well, that one's out, right? So we have to say, this is just a piece of it, it's one piece of information that we get throughout the 12-year process to get them prepared to go out into the world.
And that's what I worry about, hyper-focusing on, specific limited data, especially when it's being measured by forces outside of our control and it's a moving target. That what I don't want to do is that we get so hyper-focused and vigilant that we lose sight of the forest for the trees. And I think they do a great job of keeping that in mind. What she just said is that we graduate students at the end of 12th grade ready for whatever, and that it may be a bumpy road along the way, and if we overly focus on that and try to correct it, what else gets left to the side?
And I totally appreciate what you just said, however, I don't think it's an either or, I think it's an and.
Right. But that's why I want to make sure we're keeping perspective and not, and I appreciate this because it is very useful information, but at the same time, what I don't want to do is make it seem as though because we are looking at, especially high school versus high school, well, we are now telling the team to push down to, we've got to get these scores, these specific measurable metrics improved at whatever cost. And that's what I don't want the perception
I think
to
this is
be.
just a curious thing, like, look at this, let's talk about it.
Oh, yeah, and absolutely, and you
and-
can identify trends and see,
And
oh, math,
identify trends.
third grade math,
Obviously,
yeah.
it's following the trends that have already been established.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's just another piece of information, yeah, absolutely. Okay, any more on the end of course? You ready to go to the last one?
Mhm.
Okay. On the last page, this is kind of taking all of the student achievement, student progress, academic growth, relative performance, and of course, the one that really sticks out the most is the relative performance. And that is taking a school population and comparing, let's say that that Smith School has 30% free and reduced lunch rate. And then in other districts, there are other schools that have 30% free and reduced lunch. How did the kids do? And looking at this chart, because there are a number of NRs, which would be in the new system as NR, that's the area it appears that there's difficulty and that would be economically disadvantaged, that particular area. So that's what that means.
I don't think I'm tracking. So
Okay.
explain that a little bit better? Yeah,
This one right here.
so relative performance, we're looking at the campus.
It compares your campus eco-dis with other campuses across the state,
With the same,
with the same.
Okay, so let's look at Eastview. Eastview has a C under relative performance. So Eastview, in comparison to other schools that are high school that had 33.8% economically disadvantaged, they made a C.
Which is above 70.
okay.
Which is above 70.
So it's just one more thing to be cognizant of.
So on a side note on this one, again, at the TEA presentation last week, that column in particular is one that they're seeking feedback on revamping. So they were asking feedback on whether, because that category is growth, and Commissioner Morath admitted that relative performance is not growth, and so they stick a performance
Right.
indicator in the growth category. And also explained that there is intentionality on the 8th ref system in that part, that there are multiple measures because they know that a campus might perform in one way but not perform in another. And so that's why they set the system up in a way where you are scored in both but take the better of the two scores in order to then that move into your category of score. But they recognize that the relative performance is not probably measuring what we want it to measure. So they asked feedback on whether it should be relative growth, whether it should be something else completely, whether it should be relative growth should be a third one, and then you take the best of the three. But that was part of the conversation was around this column and how, part of the conversation was about how take anything with the STAR test, the most highly correlated element between scores and a variable is your socioeconomic status. So that is like, there were districts at the meeting that were like, no, but what also about if they are a migrant or if they're mobile? And Mike Morath was like, doesn't matter. You take any of those things, and as long as if you control for socioeconomic status, you can really highly predict the score of what a student's going to have on the assessment. So
what do you think this says to us, Terry, looking at that chart?
I mean, it's interesting to me. To me, it's a community question too.
Yeah.
I mean, because you look at our kindergarten scores coming in, right? And our kindergarten scores have 60% of our kids coming into our schools at either well below grade level or below grade level.
Yeah.
So there's a question on whether, at what point where's the misalignment between the wealth of a student and their readiness for school I have my own kind of qualms about kindergarten readiness, so we won't get into those here. But there are, just the connection there. I mean, there's lots of different elements, which
Yeah.
I think, again, to the conversation about where do we get them at the end, that to me is the point of all of these formative assessments along the way, is where do we get them by the end? Because if they're coming to us not highly correlated to the amount of wealth the student has compared to where they're scoring on things, they're coming to us that way.
You're starting with a larger gap.
Then what can we do to keep working on that gap, and so that when they exit us, we feel like they're college, career, military ready.
Terry, would you tell me that statistic again, because that's sort of alarming. 60% of the.
I mean, it's actually on your.
It's on that
It's the
chart.
colorful bar
Colorful.
chart one. So our kindergartners
Attached, yeah.
BOY, if you add together
Oh,
red and
Add those
yellow,
together.
that's kids coming into our system as kindergartners that are either well below or below grade level.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah. So and if you, I have a 4-year-old, right? What has the last 2.5 years been for kids that luckily they were getting some
Yeah.
maybe.
Many times.
And my kid was in school, but it was a revolving door of people going through as the employees there. So, I mean, that's not surprising to me in the sense of
Yeah.
what we know the last couple of years have been for early childhood. And but that is, we have to take kind of all these pieces together and then think about, that's
Exactly.
again what informs the district improvement plan and the work of the people.
So in the district, because this is the area that worries me. When I'm looking at some of the things that the rates for some of the schools, it's high. And so is one of the things that we're doing giving more interventionists to those schools that have a high rate? Or are we doing some, I guess, what supportive things are we doing to help those schools that have the really high rates?
All of them have, all of them aren't hitting the mark when it comes to that particular category. So, to the conversation that we had before, it's not about more interventionists. We have to rework our whole model because of what kids have lost or didn't have the opportunity to learn over the last several years. We're aligned. I think one of the keys that we saw was an issue was, aligned resources and aligned curriculum, which we've talked about lots of times about, that being implemented really in the 1920 school year, and then March 20 happened. So I think those are all things that, are informing what we're doing for that area. I don't think we're looking at it, in true transparency, that category gives me kind of the queasy stomach a little bit, just because it's saying, hey, your kids are wealthier, they should be doing better. Purely saying, I know because of how much money your kid makes, kids of that parent make, they should be scoring higher, because that's how correlated this test is to that. And that doesn't feel real good about even what we're even talking about when it comes to the STAR test, because that feels like it's so stable when it comes to socioeconomic status that we're rocking the boat, because our kids with the wealth of their parents should be performing better, and that feels really kind of awful.
What does that say about this? What does that say about the test?
It really says the test, we know what the test is measuring. If I felt like the test was measuring something beyond that and was highly correlated, then I might feel a little different. But that's where my struggle is with that particular category.
See, and I don't have that struggle. I don't know all the factors that go into that, but we're being compared. COVID was not unique to Georgetown,
Right.
was not unique to Texas, and we're just being compared to other campuses that are identical to these.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that there are other factors involved, and it sounds like from what you were saying earlier, you all are working on that. And that's all we could ask, is for you to analyze it and let us know if there's something we, the board, can do to help.
Well, that's probably the most important question.
That's the most important question.
We're getting ready to go into strategic planning. We're doing all these things now, and there's a chance that we need to reevaluate our goals to support the work you guys are seeing and the gaps you guys are seeing. And we need a stronger voice from you guys and the campus administration and the principals to help form those decisions, because whatever we end up putting in and voting on, regardless of how invested or in the process we are, that's what you guys have to live with.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, yeah.
the more honest conversation from you guys and the more identification of things that either do or don't correlate or aren't having as big an impact, the easier it is for us to get you guys the support you need and align our thoughts really with where our district is at and where we need to get to. And that's our whole job.
Add something to it. Just, I think these are, notes worthy of consideration in that big conversation. To your point, you're right, the problems aren't super unique to Georgetown. But what's hopefully unique to Georgetown is the way in which we approach them. And I think that's something that we really have to look at. How much value we place on the information here, I think is something we have to think about because of some of the things that Terry mentioned. Also, y'all talk standard setting. So, there's kind of some issues with the test itself, which we know there's lots of correlation, that biased against poverty and other kind of diversity factors. The test is said to be a criterion reference or criterion-based test, and it is absolutely not at all. It is a norm reference test, which means they collect the performance. In fact, they're doing what they call it standard setting. We call it norm referencing this year. Once all of the students have taken the tests, they'll analyze the results and then create cut scores based on that performance, right? To establish, okay, well, this is what it's going to look like for this percentage of kids to pass or not pass. And that occurring after the fact establishes a norm that's based not on student learning, right? The base is a norm based on, creating a predictable and reliable system for their accountability purposes. And that, I think that's, I'm not saying that because your point about who we're compared to and how we're compared, it affects us. That is a truth. But depending on what we want and how we do it locally, I think also has to come into play, because we're playing a game that has rules. The rules are a rigged system to create a narrative. Whether we agree with the narrative or not, that part is just the truth. They bring us in, tell us what the standard is. So it's not a true learned versus not learned assessment tool. And I think if you ask the test makers, they'd tell you that too, right? There are some tests in our system that are a better learned versus not learned. This just isn't necessarily one of them. It doesn't mean that the information is not useful and that we shouldn't look at trends and groups and that kind of stuff, because I agree we should. I think we have to be careful about how much value we use as a judgment on it. I think that's the greatest flaw in our current accountability system, is that this information is used to judge schools as opposed to, it's a research tool technically. But anyways, a little bit on soapbox there. I think that's important information in the grander conversation of like goals and plans. But
All right,
Maybe
we're
I'll
bumping
do
up
this
against
yourself.
the 1 o'clock in time, and I want to respect everybody's time, because I know you have to carve out time in the middle of your day. So, anything else so we can wrap it up?
No, I just want to thank these guys for sharing some honest feedback.
Yes.
It's really not easy to sit up here and say, hey, with the wealth of these kids should be here, because you open yourself to a certain criticism publicly when you do that. So I know it's not easy to give your professional opinion sometimes in an open format, but it really is a useful thing for us, so thank you guys.
Yes, all of this. Very good workshop. Good talk.
Yeah, good talk, guys.
All right.